actually argue that it hurts the game more if they had given her a roster spot over someone more deserving.
So go ahead and argue it.
Caitlin Clark has a way of forcing people to confront their own words. Not with interviews, not with clapbacks, but with performances so overwhelming that denial starts to look embarrassing.
That's exactly what I'm saying, because I think it makes a mockery of the women's game. If the focus on, now we just have to have people because of marketing and their intention, and they're not as talented, and we're not putting the best team out there.
Over the past stretch of her rookie season, Clark hasn't just played well, she's dismantled narratives. And in doing so, she's made several prominent critics publicly uncomfortable, none more visibly than Molly Qerim, who has had to walk back comments that aged poorly, almost in real time. Clark's current run is historic, but not merely because of box score totals or broken records. It's historic because of what it represents: the collapse of a coordinated skepticism that followed her into the league. For months, the conversation around Clark wasn't just about whether she was good, it was about whether she belonged, whether her popularity was earned, whether her game would translate, whether the attention she brought would somehow damage the sport rather than elevate it. That framing has not survived contact with reality. We've already seen legends quietly concede the point. Diana Taurasi, long positioned as the standard bearer, eventually acknowledged Clark's impact. Others, like Cheryl Swoops, went the opposite direction, doubling down on skepticism, and in the process, undermining their own credibility.
By the way, it wasn't that anybody didn't think she was going to be successful or not play. It was just that we felt the other players in the W deserve shine as well.
Each new Clark performance sharpened the contrast between what was being said and what was actually happening on the court. Now, with Molly Qerim revising earlier takes under pressure from both fans and colleagues, it's clear we're watching a broader reckoning. This moment didn't start with a game. It started with an omission. When the USA Women's Olympic roster was announced, Clark's absence was immediately obvious. Not just because she was the most popular player in women's basketball, but because she was already reshaping the league's visibility. The explanation, offered by head coach Cheryl Reeve, was procedural. Clark lacked experience, hadn't attended training camp due to March Madness, and had a slow start to her WNBA season. By traditional standards, the decision made sense. Rookies rarely make Olympic teams, especially when they miss pre-selection processes. The criteria were consistent, but context matters, and this was not a normal moment. Basketball history offers a parallel. The original Dream Team didn't just dominate the Olympics, it globalized the sport. It understood that excellence and exposure are not competing values.
Molly, I said...
Really, Molly? Wow.
They jumped on us. They jumped on us, Molly. They jumped on us as a show. They jumped on us as a show when we talk about...
Many fans believed women's basketball was facing a similar inflection point, and that leaving the face of the sport at home wasn't just conservative, it was a missed opportunity. Reeve herself acknowledged Clark's value to the league, calling her arrival good for business. That's what made the decision feel contradictory. If Clark is good for business, good for visibility, and good for growth, why exclude her from the largest global stage the sport has? Sometimes leadership requires separating personal preference from institutional responsibility. In this case, the optics suggested the opposite. Still, disagreement is fair. What pushed the conversation into controversy was the response from media figures like Molly Qerim, who didn't just support the decision but escalated it. Qerim argued that including Clark on the Olympic roster would hurt the game, implying that Clark wasn't talented enough to justify the attention she would receive. The suggestion was that her presence would turn the Olympics into a spectacle rather than a competition. That claim hasn't survived scrutiny. Ironically, the outcome many critics feared, Clark overshadowing the team, never materialized because the opposite happened. Without Clark, interest in Team USA's games was minimal. Ratings lagged, engagement dropped. The team won, as expected, but largely in obscurity. The competition level wasn't particularly high, which only reinforced the sense that this would have been the ideal stage to showcase the sport to a broader audience. Some argued that Clark's star power might have distracted from the pursuit of gold, but that argument collapses under its own weight. Winning gold was never in serious doubt. Sharing the spotlight would not have diminished excellence, it would have amplified it. Instead, the team won quietly, and the broader opportunity evaporated. The idea that Clark wasn't talented enough to make the roster has aged especially poorly. By the time the Olympic conversation was still unfolding, Clark had already begun rewriting the WNBA record book. And what followed turned skepticism into satire. In August alone, Clark averaged 24 points, 8.5 assists, and 5.2 rebounds per game. Numbers that don't just lead rookies, but compete with the league's elite. She was named Rookie of the Month for the third time and Eastern Conference Player of the Month, becoming the first rookie in WNBA history to earn that honor. On September 4th, she recorded a 20-point, 10-rebound, 10-assist triple-double in a win over the Sparks, her second career triple-double, and became the fastest player in league history to reach 100 made three-pointers in a season. She tied Courtney Vandersloot's record for the longest streak of games with at least 20 points and 10 assists. She set rookie records for consecutive point-assist double-doubles, total double-doubles by a rookie guard, single-game three-pointers, and became the youngest player ever to record back-to-back points-assists, double-doubles. These aren't cherry-picked stats. They're structural dominance. So the question becomes unavoidable. What was the criticism actually about? It clearly wasn't basketball. Clark's skill set, range, vision, pace manipulation, spatial awareness has translated immediately. Her playmaking alone has changed how defenses guard entire possessions. Opponents are forced to pick their poison, and Clark punishes every choice. She doesn't need to monopolize the ball to control the game. She bends it. That's why the attempt to downplay her talent in order to uplift others has rung hollow. The WNBA is full of elite players, but elevating the league does not require diminishing Clark. Doing so is not balance, it's misdirection. Clark entered the league under a microscope unlike any rookie before her. Expectations weren't just high, they were existential. She wasn't asked merely to adapt, she was asked to carry. The Indiana Fever hadn't made the playoffs in 7 years. The league itself was riding a surge of popularity sparked largely by Clark's college career. Most rookies are afforded time to grow. Clark was handed responsibility on day one. The contrast with how other generational talents are treated is stark. When Victor Wembanyama entered the NBA, praise flowed freely despite his team's struggles. Losses were contextualized, development was celebrated. With Clark, mistakes were magnified, and success was often reframed as inconvenience. In some ways, Clark created this burden herself. Her college dominance accelerated interest in women's basketball at a pace the infrastructure wasn't prepared for. But instead of receiving patience, she received skepticism. Instead of appreciation, she received gatekeeping. And yet, she responded by elevating everyone around her. Aaliyah Boston is having the best season of her career and earned an all-star selection with the second most fan votes in the league. Clark and Boston became the first duo in Fever history to record 20-point double-doubles in the same game. Kelsey Mitchell also made the All-Star team, benefiting from the spacing and tempo Clark creates. Clark set franchise records for assists in a quarter and in a game, routinely generating scoring opportunities that don't appear in her own stat line. Her passes, especially in transition and off-broken plays, aren't just accurate, they're anticipatory. Teammates don't need to be stars. They need to move, cut, and trust that the ball will arrive. That trust changes how a team plays. This is what critics missed. Clark doesn't dominate attention by force. She earns it by function. Her presence simplifies the game for others and complicates it for opponents. That's the hallmark of a superstar. And superstardom, like it or not, comes with an expectation beyond wins and losses. You have to generate interest. You have to bring people in. On that front, Clark hasn't just met expectations, she's obliterated them. Viewership spikes follow her schedule, arenas sell out, merchandise moves, conversations happen. This is why the recent attempts to minimize her impact feel increasingly hollow. What once passed as cautious analysis now reads more like resistance to an outcome that no longer fits old assumptions. The debate has shifted, not because opinions evolved organically, but because reality left certain arguments with nowhere to stand. When performances pile up and records fall in rapid succession, skepticism stops sounding thoughtful and starts sounding defensive. Molly Qerim eventually tried to soften her stance, but the pivot was impossible to miss. The original comments didn't disappear just because the narrative changed. The receipts existed. fans remembered, co-hosts remembered, and most importantly, the contrast between what was said and what unfolded on the court became impossible to rationalize away. This wasn't a case of hindsight bias or cherry-picked moments. It was a sustained stretch of dominance that directly contradicted the premise that Clark wasn't ready, wasn't good enough, or somehow didn't belong in elite basketball conversations. What we are witnessing now is the rise of a bona fide superstar, not because the media decided to anoint one, but because the game itself delivered the verdict. Clark didn't lobby for belief. She didn't posture or campaign. She simply played, night after night, against the best competition in the world and forced people to reconcile their opinions with what their eyes were telling them. That's the difference between hype and legitimacy. Hype needs maintenance. Legitimacy sustains itself. And that's why this moment matters beyond box scores or debates about individual personalities. This isn't a victory lap or a gotcha moment for critics. It's a turning point for the sport. Women's basketball doesn't need insulation from its brightest stars, and it doesn't need to fear visibility. It needs to lean into it. Clark's success does not diminish anyone else's legacy or contributions. It doesn't crowd out other great players. It widens the stage, pulls in new audiences, and creates more space for excellence to be recognized across the league. For too long, growth has been framed as something fragile, something that could be disrupted by too much attention on one player. Clark's emergence has proven the opposite. Attention, when earned, is additive. It builds infrastructure. It raises standards. It challenges institutions to move faster, think bigger, and evolve in real time rather than clinging to precedent. In the end, the real lesson here has very little to do with Molly Qerim or even with Olympic rosters. It's about how institutions respond when the future shows up ahead of schedule. Do they adapt or do they rationalize? Do they recognize momentum or attempt to regulate it away? Clark didn't ask to be a standard bearer or a symbol. She didn't demand exceptions or special treatment. She just kept playing at a level that made old frameworks obsolete. Now the rest of the sport faces a simple but uncomfortable choice. It can keep up, adjusting narratives, structures, and expectations to match what's actually happening on the court. Or it can keep explaining why the moment everyone is witnessing shouldn't matter as much as it clearly does.